We started this Fresh Friday series to create space for practitioners, community members, policymakers, and all other interested people to learn and share about community development, especially topics that are deeply important to community development, which includes community wealth building and efforts for communities to directly own and control resources in their communities. So before we get started, just a few quick notes on logistics for the day. First, please note we'll be recording this session as we intend to share it with interested individuals who are not able to join us this morning. Second, if you have any questions or comments while one of our panelists is speaking, please keep yourself on mute and feel free to leave it in the chat and we will try to incorporate it into the session. Toward the end of the session, we will have an open Q&A during which you'll have the floor to ask your own questions. Third, we want to remind you that if you hear a phrase or an acronym that you're not familiar with, we encourage you to ask about it in the chat. My colleague Grace will be watching the chat and will jump in to explain as she's able. And we'll also try to, if there's a term that is especially jargony, we'll try to preempt that. This is a space for learning and we encourage you to use it as such. And fourth, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. So today we're going to be hearing from some incredible panelists advancing community wealth building in Rhode Island. So Bear is the president of the Break the Cycle Cooperative Hub and chair of Co-op Rhody. And Jessica David is the co-founder and president of Local Return, the president and CEO of the Rhode Island Community Investment Cooperative, and the principal of Good Worth Working For LLC. Thank you both so much for joining us today. So to ground today's conversation, I'm just going to go over some basics of what community wealth building is and what it actually looks like. So just to ground us in what is community wealth. So, and we can get into these definitions and Bear and Jessica can kind of take these apart a little later. But just a basic community wealth, how we're thinking about it is assets and resources locally and collectively controlled or owned by a community to support care of a place and one another. It can include multiple forms of capital. So thinking about financial capital like money, but also social, intellectual, natural, political, all those things. So some community wealth building strategies. I think many on the call are familiar with these, but just going over for folks who may not be as familiar, these are some of them. But thinking about like housing cooperatives, worker cooperatives, community land trusts. One Neighborhood Builders has a community land trust for some of our home ownership opportunities for folks. Community investment funds. Social benefits or nonprofit cooperatives, producer cooperatives, or like multi-state cooperatives, like a co-op grocery store, or thinking about locally owned credit unions like Navigent. And then there are more examples than that. So just in terms of that, but in terms of what grounds these models, what I've learned from Jessica and from the Democracy Collaborative is there's these kind of 5 elements that, and then they can look different in the different models, but this locally rooted finance, inclusive and democratic enterprise, just use of land and property, fair work, and progressive procurement, which is like sourcing and where people are buying things from. So yes, that is kind of a speed through of making sure we all have the grounding we need to make sure we can be present in this conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn to our panel. So, Jessica, could you talk about how does local return define community wealth? And can you talk about the importance of focusing on wealth and community wealth specifically?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see everybody. I was getting distracted by everyone introducing themselves in the chat. So sorry about that. Yeah, I'm Jessica David with Local Return and the Rhode Island Community Investment Cooperative, and we really use the definition of community wealth that was developed by the Democracy Collaborative that Ali shared. Our work is very much inspired by them and a lot of the work they've been doing for, at this point, decades. But I think of community wealth as the reason it matters is really about resilience. When something happens, whether it's for an individual, a family, a community, a place, wealth is what allows us to bounce back. So if we lose a job, if there's a pandemic, if we get sick, if someone we know, is struggling with something, then, the people who are able to, and the places that are able to bounce back more tend to have more assets. We certainly saw that during COVID, with the places that were hardest hit and have had, I would say, the longest tail of impact from that. So to me, community wealth it's a cushion, and that's why it matters. And it's the same for people as it is for places. So whether we're talking about individual wealth or we're talking about, place-based wealth, we really try to stress at Local Return that it is about different forms of capital. It's not just about money, although it is about money. Because it can be very easy, in community-based work to talk about all the wonderful things that communities have and the many wonderful assets beyond money. But places also need money, and people need money. So, we don't want to minimize that. And we also want to hold up the many other forms of capital that exist in places. We also talk a lot about ownership, and that ownership is local. It is, shared ownership, where there is the people who have a say over, the assets are people who actually live in the communities. And they know that community, they know the people there, and they are stewarding those resources for themselves, for their community. So the control and the benefits from those assets and that wealth remains in that local place. That's really how we think about it. Wealth is it's the assets that are a community is able to use to care for itself, to steward itself, to take care of itself, and also to change and adapt as things happen. So it's not just about, bad things happening. It's also about being able to, move forward and sort of transform into the future. Does that answer your question, Allie?
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much. I love the connection to kind of the resilience and being able to kind of respond and stay whole and together in responses to different changes in the environment and circumstances. We know life can be unpredictable. So now I'm going to turn to Bear. So Bear, you're the president of Break the Cycle, which is a cooperative cooperative hub focused on serving formerly incarcerated individuals. And you're also the chair of Co-op Rhody. Could you give an overview of what each of these organizations do and why the worker cooperative model was important for each of these organizations? Bear, I think you're muted. Want to make sure we're getting your.
Here we are. Here we
There we
are.
go.
Here we are. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, Break the Cycle and Co-op Rhody, wearing two hats is something amazing. I never thought I'd be in this position in all my years of community organizing. Break the Cycle, we are focused on formerly incarcerated individuals and their path into reentry, and also their path while they're inside behind the walls, because we are trying to make sure that this whole picture of cooperative businesses is accessible and heard by everybody. So with the formerly incarcerated citizens, I remember when I was in work release and we were going to work and coming back to the prison system, but getting out, we didn't have business acumen. We had great ideas of businesses and stuff like that we wanted to do, but now that this whole picture of the cooperative business model is now in the air, because I never knew what it was coming into the scene. Now that it's in the air, we're trying to make sure that not only formerly incarcerated citizens, but your everyday Jane or John Doe from the hood can understand that, you can have a cooperative and you can have a business. A lot of people are doing this already. A lot of people are working with each other in garages, little mechanics here and there in the neighborhood. I know a few mechanics working with each other, and I'm having conversations with them and saying, hey, look, you guys are a cooperative, just don't even know it. So, this is our big mission for Break the Cycle, is to inform the people about this business opportunity. Pivoting to Co-op Rhody, well, since this whole marijuana initiative came about and the legalization of it, and then it turned into the recreational legalization of it, what is now on the table, we understand here at Co-op Rhody that a lot of people are being excluded from this big money making machine, right? So we're just trying to make sure that uh, that we have a chance to, to spread this wealth throughout our communities. The state has set aside a extraordinary plan for cooperative businesses as far as it's tied to uh, uh, tied to cannabis. So they have put in the law that 6 cannabis stores must be a cooperative, and we are trying to facilitate that and make sure that people have that business acumen and to be successful moving into the future, because it's tough. When you're talking about building a cooperative, which we'll get into later, yeah, it's easy, but it's not. So I'll leave that right there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for giving us that overview. And of all the different facets that are coming into that, I think that talking about laws coming into that and talking about business, and there's so much there that we'll definitely dig into. So Jessica, now I want to turn to you. Can you give us an overview of what Local Return and the RI Community Investment Cooperative do, and what do you think is special about this model?
Sure. Yeah, so Local Return is a nonprofit organization. We're a 501c3. We were founded in 2021, I think was our official birthday. And we exist to build community wealth through community investment and ownership with a focus on neighborhoods that have experienced historical disinvestment in Rhode Island. So a couple notes on some of those terms. Community investment and ownership, we've always talked about them as sort of our 2 main strategies. I'm actually thinking we should combine them because they really are like the flip, they're the same coin. They're the opposite sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other. And I also want to say a note about historical disinvestment. So, when we use the word disinvestment, there's a lot of ways that shows up. It could be that there's just no investment that has come into communities and places. It could be that money has come in harmful and extractive ways, in predatory ways. It could be that there's been displacement and gentrification, over a long period of time. So it could be that the people, who are benefiting, there's a tremendous amount of inequality among the people who are benefiting. And that's really where Local Return came from, is looking at and I think of One Neighborhood Builders and so many of the people on this call as leading this work around social determinants. I call them social determinants of opportunity, not just health, but, looking at all of these different areas, outcomes, and, we see the same neighborhoods that are, experiencing the lowest outcomes across systems. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about the economy or education or, interactions with criminal justice system. Like it is, it's the same neighborhoods that always pop up on all of these maps that we're all used to seeing. So what does it actually mean to make real change in those communities? That's why Local Return was created. We really take an ecosystem approach. So we think that there is no one strategy there's no one fund, there's no one program that is going to fix all of this. It is really about looking at how all these things intersect and support one another. And it requires, I think of it as a chessboard, although I don't play chess, so I'm not actually sure if this is an accurate metaphor, but it's like, we got to move, maybe it's more like football. I don't know. We have to move all the pieces, kind of together. We can't just send one person down the field. I've totally messed up my metaphors, but I think you know what I mean. So the Rhode Island Community Investment Cooperative is a separate entity that was created by Local Return to house our first community investment fund. So Local Return created the Diversified Community Investment Fund. We'll talk more about that. It's actually the first of its kind in the country. It's Rhode Island's first community investment fund. We couldn't hold that under a nonprofit structure. So we created the Rhode Island Community Investment Cooperative, which is actually a public benefit corporation. Rhode Island's cooperative law didn't have an option that suited an investment cooperative, which is a whole other strategy we could talk about. But we are very much acting like a cooperative. So every person who invests or entity that invests into the fund becomes a member of the cooperative. They get one vote regardless of how much they invest. They will elect the board. They can actually, and we very much hope will be running for the board, be nominating board members as well as nominating investment committee members. And I'll talk more about the investment committee. So those are the 2 structures. the only connection, well, right now the board of local return is the same founding board of the Rhode Island Community Investment Cooperative. We're hoping within a year, year and a half that board actually gets expanded and we're replacing ourselves. The only ongoing connection between the two is we did write into the bylaws that local return will always have a seat on the cooperative board, one seat, so it's not a controlling interest in any way. Hopefully that made sense. It's a bit confusing.
Yeah, I think that was so great. And I love how you talked about how you and Bear both talked about this focus on communities that have been excluded from building wealth. And I think that that being the focus of both of them is what I've heard consistently throughout, thinking about all different models and how can communities that are putting their work into it build wealth. And also I love the tangibleness of it, also seeing how law is playing into this. So thank you for raising up all of those tentacles, as a term I like to use, of how it's touching so many different things. So Bear, turning back to you. So Break the Cycle put out this great report on worker cooperatives as a tool for racial and economic justice for formerly incarcerated people in Rhode Island. What do you hope people take away from this report?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, so what I hope that people can take away from the report, especially for our formerly incarcerated citizens, I would like them to take away that the knowledge that you not only have a job, but you can possibly have your own business even before you come home. It's important coming out the door that you have some kind of structure. And as far as the institutions that we have here, I'm not sure what they're doing for rehabilitation, but I don't think it's changed since I came home. And I came home in 1992, I believe. It's been so long. I don't like to remember that. But yeah, and the reason why we have this such a high recidivism rate, because we talk about the systems and cycles that are in place for mass incarceration and all that bad stuff. So we have to stop feeding this prison industrial complex, aka modern day slavery. So I would like to hopefully make sure that our formerly incarcerated citizens take hope away from this report. To also know that, just for the everyday person, once again, to know that there is a business entity called a cooperative. Like I said, before I came into this space, I did not know what a cooperative was. I've been working since who knows when, since I was a knee-high to a grasshopper, as we like to say. And yeah, I never knew what that was. I actually started a LLC at one time, a landscaping company with my son, and it was so easy. Just, fill out some paperwork and go downtown and blah, blah, blah. So, I really want people to understand that this model right here is something that can create this generational wealth model, vehicle that we're looking for. Once again, I talked about how, if you're just a regular citizen or somebody that has been formerly incarcerated, you can have your own business. You can, there's possibilities for changing the way that this generational wealth is not being passed down. I want my children's children's children to have this generational wealth, even just the idea. So, to take away from the report that, once again, to answer your question, I just want people to take away from the report that there's hope for the future, there's hope in change, and let's get to it.
That's the message right there. Okay. So I love that. And I think instilling hope when we've talked about there's been so many attempts at reform and I know those have been not always so successful. And so I think thinking about how can people create their own hope and how can people create their own success when the system has failed them. And so I think I love that messaging. Thank you for sharing that. So now I'm going to turn to Jessica to talk a little bit more about kind of those systemic factors in terms of the what's going on in Rhode Island in terms of community wealth building, and where do you see gaps in addition to that?
Yeah, good question. I guess because you said systemic factors, and I want to follow up on what Bear said, that we absolutely know that the inequalities in community wealth and individual wealth are systemic and structural. These are not the result of, you may have seen my puppies just running. This is not the result of individual decision making. The our systems have been created in ways that marginalize certain people and benefit certain people at the expense of others. And that absolutely has to do with race. So if you align, like I was talking about the maps, if you align those maps with, diversity within our neighborhoods, there's a direct overlay there. So I really think it's important to acknowledge that. In terms of what's happening in Rhode Island, I would say, the good news is we're talking about it. And a few years ago, we weren't talking about it. So a few years ago, when I would use the words community wealth, wealth was mostly just a dirty word. And it still is a dirty word in a certain context. It's a complicated word. And I want to be really clear about that. But, people didn't really think about wealth as we weren't talking about it as an important strategy. It was, we were focused on income. We were focused on programs. And I still think that's the case broadly in a lot of our public systems and programs and laws. But I think there is this burgeoning movement, and you have people like Bear and many others who are really now like laser focused on ownership and wealth. So that's like the really good news. I still think we have a really long way to go as an ecosystem around wealth building. If you look at those 5 elements that the Democracy Collaborative lays out, which I think are really good. So, finance, basically like worker, fair work, ownership structures. There's one around land, good land policy. And I always forget there's the 5th one. We have little things kind of happening in some, well, no, I said finance. So, I think there's little things happening.
Procurement?
Procurement. Oh my gosh, procurement, which is such an important one. And again, we have a little, we have the Supply RI initiative, which is doing we have some institutions that are doing pieces of things around local procurement. We have actually really robust farm to school effort here. So, like we're inching, if I go back to my chess football metaphor, like we're inching down the field sort of, but I still think like we're not making big gains, and there's still more work to do to connect the pieces. So I think Bear's example is a great one, which is it's all well and good to say cooperatives should exist. We now, thanks to Forza Liberal, we have a worker-owned cooperative option, which we didn't have several years ago. But it's not, as he said, it's not easy. It's not very straightforward how to start a cooperative. There are barriers to financing a cooperative. It's complicated. Democratic governance is actually, turns out, not particularly easy. And so we need the structures that support people, which is what he's doing, and we're starting to see that in other places. We need we need the same amount of energy that we've seen going to like high growth, often tech startups, which often leave the state, or attracting, big corporate entities from other places. We need that energy into, this grassroots, this local movement. So I'm not sure that's the answer you wanted, Ellie, but that's kind of how I feel about it. We do have pieces that are super important. I think of them as kind of like the vanguard, they're kind of breaking the ice. But we have so much more to do to break the barriers down and to facilitate and enable those folks to do their work more, to do it to greater impact, to do it with less heartache and backbreaking effort. So a lot of that is policy. A lot of that is, just sort of facilitating and smoothing the way, connecting the dots. So Bear might disagree with me, and it may have, and folks in this call may have better perspectives, but those are my 2 cents.
No, that's perfect. That's really helpful, I think, in laying out the landscape. And I love the highlighting that folks are doing this and how like people have led the way and how that's facilitated some change, and that also we have a long way to go. And so you mentioned in your answer, Jessica, how like it was, and Bear has mentioned how it was kind of hard to start a cooperative. So Bear, could you talk about what was so challenging about it, and what were kind of some misconceptions people had in terms of what made it difficult to start the cooperative?
Yes. So I will be frank in saying that when you're working with people, it's not easy. Uh, any group of people, right? It doesn't matter um, where you come from. We all have our own individual personalities, and a lot of times, when you're having these early discussions about building a cooperative and the excitement, you have the excitement phase, and everybody's all, oh yeah, oh man, that sounds great, and oh, I want to be down. How can I be down to do that? And then when they have to start showing up and start sacrificing their time and start, sacrificing some of their personal beliefs and, learning how to not be so emotional about your beliefs and being rejected, if you will, because that's always a tough one for us, right, as humans. Um, but yeah, so when you're working, and I'll bring it right back to the demographic of a formerly incarcerated citizen. Um, a lot of times we have the want to, but not the know how, right? So some of those barriers and hurdles that we are overcoming as far as the knowledge base and the resources and stuff like that to learn this model and to learn once again the business acumen, how to run a business, just what it is to be in a business with somebody else. A lot of times, you're coming out of a prison system where you're alone, and now you have to come out here and deal with the public and reacclimate yourself to life out here in the world, right? So I, I've 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 tried to build three cooperatives in the cannabis sector before I became the chairman of Co-op Rhody, um, which we'll get into later on as far as the ecosystem is concerned. But I said to myself, you know what? This is not something that I want to waste my time with working with a bunch of people that can't agree with one another. So that's not always the case, but that's one of the hardest things about a cooperative is having that like-minded atmosphere stay. I've been through some processes of going back and forth, because you have to have your bylaws and all this other kind of stuff. And those are the laws and rules that govern your business. So, and when people sign on to that, they have to adhere to that. A lot of people don't understand that. Okay, you have a business, these are your bylaws, these are your rules, and you have to march to that beat. So one of the biggest conceptions that I think that I've come up across is, it's not as easy, like I said, starting an LLC or, I started a nonprofit, and that's not even easy, but a cooperative is a whole nother animal in itself. It is, you really have to set aside your personal feelings, not your beliefs, but your feelings. Um, and yeah, that is what I've been noticing coming into this space. I've seen some successes, right? We have cooperatives here in Rhode Island that are very successful. Um, I believe there's one that has employed formerly incarcerated citizens and started that from formerly incarcerated citizens out here on the street, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me. But I also know that White Electric across the street from a classical high school is a cooperative, and they are so successful and happy. We work with them closely in trying to build a cooperative organization or ecosystem in Rhode Island for all the cooperatives to come together. Um, I'm not sure if any cooperatives here in the room have heard about this, but I'll drop it in the chat and see if we can bring that conversation back, because there's power in numbers, there's voting power in organizations that can stick together. So yeah, that's one of the, like I said, going back to your question, is one of the things I've had trouble with is just organizing the people. Um, and I'll speak directly to the people from my demographic. We are not as trusting as we should be. So therefore, it's hard for us to even sit in the same room and stick together and find some common ground and build some stuff. So we're dealing with a lot as far as the demographics that you come from and the feelings of those demographics and what they have gone through being excluded throughout this whole process of building America. So we're not that trustworthy, or not trust giving, not trustworthy, but trust giving, when it comes to working together and promises being held. We talk about social equity, and these conversations have been around since the beginning of Reconstruction and slavery days. They've been talking about making amends for all the things that they've done forever, and here we are in 2024, and I'm dealing with these new cannabis laws, and they're talking about social equity as far as the disproportionate areas that impacted by the war on drugs. So, uh, I think I'm straying away from your question, but building a cooperative is hard work. It's easy if you can all smile together and remember that you're doing it for a certain reason. And as long as you can keep that focus in mind and the light at the end of that tunnel, you should be okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Bear. And I recognize that questions can lead into other thoughts. And so, yeah, I appreciate your kind of bringing it in to what the question made you think about as well. So this is our last question for both of our panels before we jump into Q&A. And I want to make sure to leave time for audience Q&A. So I'll ask both of you to keep your answers somewhat brief. So basically my question for both of you, I'll start with Jessica and then we'll go to Bear, is kind of what's next? What is next for local return and the investment cooperative? And are there any ways for people on the call to support your work? And then Bear, will go to you and I'll ask about Co-op Rhody and Break the Cycle.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, we have launched a direct public offering for the Local Return Diversified Community Investment Fund. So this is Rhode Island's first fund that anyone in the state can contribute to. And there's a lot of complexities to it, which I will not get into now. I'm happy to talk more about it. I'm also going to paste in the chat where we actually have the actual offerings live on a crowdfunding website. So you can read the 30-something page offering memo and as well as some overview of that. And I would love to talk to people more about that. So you can actually become an investor into the fund for folks who would fit within a low-income qualification. The minimum investment is $500. For other folks, the minimum investment is $2,500. The $500 series investors actually get a higher rate of return. And then we also have an option for institutional or accredited investors, which are the people who can typically invest. It's actually unusual that all the rest of us get to invest into something like this. And they get the lowest rate of return, but they're enabling something really important to happen. So happy to talk more about that. We're always looking for operational support too. So I can't not mention that. And I think, like Bear, we're really trying to build a network here and a movement. This is not about individual organizations or programs. It's about different ways of relating to each other, relating to our economy, different ways of working. And so I encourage people, you can sign up at our e-news list. We try to at least put out things that are happening, but think about your choices as a consumer in the economy, and who you're supporting. It's both a really easy message and a really difficult message at the holidays because everyone's talking about shop local, which is so important, and also it's really easy to hit the the button on Amazon where the thing shows up at your door the next day. But we have a tremendous amount of power with our dollar. So really encourage folks to think about what where your values are and how you can use your money in ways that align with that. And that's everything from just support locally owned and independent businesses to supporting worker-owned businesses, and getting your coffee at Wet Electric, and other worker cooperatives that we have emerging here. So I think that's what I will say. Happy to talk more about the fund. Shout out to Kate in the chat, who is one of our first community investors and has been walking the walk from the very beginning. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica, for that. And so Bear, turning to you, what's next and how can people get involved?
next? What's next? So I dropped in the chat www.cooprody.org. You can find us Rhode Island Cannabis Justice on Instagram and Break the Cycle, www.breakthecyclecooperative.com. That is where you can find us. You can find me on any of those. Please reach out. Please reach out. Um, and I want to actually piggyback on what Jessica was saying because it's not about uh, what you are doing individually. It's about working and networking with the community in this ecosystem of change, right? So with that being said, what do we have next? Well, as you know, as doing two organizations is kind of tough, but with Break the Cycle, we are looking to obtain an office that's going to become a technical tech center. I'm trying to create the AI Cooperative Business Academy because AI is been here, and as I'm delving into the business structure of the cooperative business structure, I'm understanding that AI is very useful in this realm. I'm creating a curriculum for the cooperative business model that I'll be teaching my first class to students in March. And working closely with Co-op Rhody, of course, on this whole mission. In the beginning, Co-op Break the Cycle was just a cooperative incubator and looking to spread this idea. But now that the Cannabis Whole Initiative came, we've kind of pivoted to make sure that we can, hold the state to their promise of social equity. But we'll be getting back to that as well. But this is what Co-op Rhody, of course, we're raising funds and donating funds and facilitating participatory management and to figure out the best way to use Co-op Rhody's finances in support of the ecosystem of these 6 cooperatives that we're trying to build. Of course, our goal is to equip the cooperative founders with the resources that meet their self-identified goals, as far as their individual companies are concerned. So, next steps for us is just making sure that this thing is a success and the state upholds its promise to social equity.
Awesome. I'm so excited by all the work that both of you are doing and the work that other folks you mentioned are doing. And so it's definitely helping us feel a little more hopeful, I think, in moments when it can sometimes be hard to feel hopeful. So now with 5 minutes left, let's open it up to Q&A. If anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat or you can raise your hand if you go to next to the React button, or you can click the React button and then click raise hand, or you can message in the chat that you have a question. Or you can come off mute if that's the easiest for you. So please bring your questions.
And as my old teacher used to say, don't everybody speak at once.
It's hard to come up with good questions on a Friday morning at the end of the year.
You can jump in with a question, and if other folks have some, feel free to continue to bring them forward. I'm interested if there are any policies or other kind of programmatic changes you'd like to see at the state level in Rhode Island, or even at the municipal level, if that's relevant, that would encourage cooperatives or other type of community wealth building strategies that you've talked about today. And that's for whoever would like to jump in.
Yeah. I'll just say heck yes. We actually have, I'll try to find it and put it in the chat. Several years ago, we did a policy paper with several suggestions. There are a ton of things I think that can be done, both small and big. Everything from, some small grant funds to just help cooperative or real estate or cooperative businesses get off the ground. Some of the initial filing fees to federal community investment law has to change. So that's a whole other topic, but yes, definitely. And I think can happen at the municipal level, the state level, and the federal level. And I did see we had a couple questions in the chat.
Answer a question that was in the chat.
Yeah, there's some questions in the chat. Feel free to take take any of them. And if we don't get to any of the questions in the chat, we'll send out answers in a follow-up email. But feel
So,
free to take any of them.
yeah, what kind of strategies do we have when it comes to community outreach and spreading the word throughout Providence and Rhode Island? Yeah, we talked about how a lot of organizations are working out of their own individual silos, and there's not a lot of communication uh, in the ecosystem of cooperativeness, if you will. Um, you, I laid it on the chat where you could find us at, but we're trying to align ourselves with other organizations. I'm so glad that Jessica's on the call this morning because I now know of her organization and will definitely be reaching out to make these connections. These are the strategies, trying to break this whole individual working thing. I deal with DARE a lot with DARE. We have some functions coming up at DARE that you can look out for. But the way we try to reach out is I know that a lot of us are sitting at home on Facebook scrolling through videos and such. So I'm trying to reach people where they're at, you know. And that's kind of my angle on that because I've been dropping in my Facebook page what we're doing for a long time now, and I haven't got the response that I'm looking for. So, we talk about outreaching, but we have a problem here in Rhode Island that, we can outreach and nobody's reaching back. And the second problem is that a lot of us don't know that the information is out there or where to go get it. So I want to break that cycle as far as the hidden information is concerned. But thank you for that question because that's something I've been thinking about for a while.
Awesome. And I also saw there was a question about investment, and I saw Jessica answered that about and I saw Jessica also responded to that outreach question saying, Jessica, do you want to briefly say like working with trusted folks in your investment committee?
Yeah, I think it's a great question and one we're very sensitive to. Obviously, our founders and board members, we have our networks, but we're all limited in that. So we really primarily work with folks who are trusted within communities, who have existing established relationships. We're very cognizant of not, of that distrust factor, which is very real and very justified. So we're always looking to develop more of those if anyone wants to talk more about that. But that's really how we're also thinking about our investment committee, our membership network, and also making sure we're really supporting people. Like talking about finance and investment is not easy. It's intimidating, and I think it's deliberately intimidating to make people feel, like they're not qualified to engage in it. So like, how do we all feel more capable to engage in these conversations beyond just this one particular fund or effort?
Awesome. Well, as we're at 9:30, I want to thank our panelists for their time, insight, and expertise this morning. I know I learned something. I hope everyone on the call did too. I want to also thank all of you who took time out of your Friday morning to join us and ask questions. We hope you'll consider joining us at a future Fresh Friday. We'll be back with our next Fresh Friday in the new year.